You crack an egg into a pan on a random Tuesday morning, and you don't think about it for even a second. It's breakfast, it's routine, it's one of the most ordinary things a human can do before 8 a.m. But the real answer is far stranger because this small, unremarkable act connects you directly to a survival decision your ancestors made tens of thousands of years before agriculture, before pottery, before anything you'd recognize as a kitchen. You are not the first human to crack open an egg looking for food. You are one of the latest in a chain that stretches back further than almost anything else on your plate. For most of human evolutionary history, food came from chasing, digging, or gathering something that could run, fight back, or simply wasn't there when you needed it most. Meat spoiled fast. Plants were seasonal. Hunting large game was dangerous and often failed outright. Eggs, by comparison, offered something almost nobody else on the landscape could match. A complete, self-contained package of protein and fat, sealed inside a shell, sitting still, waiting to be found. The question is when your ancestors actually figured that out. Archaeologist Curtis Marian has spent decades excavating a site called Pinnacle Point on the southern coast of South Africa, digging through layers of sediment that stretch back well over 100,000 years. Alongside shellfish remains and stone tools, his team uncovered something that initially seemed almost too mundane to matter: fragments of ostrich eggshell, scattered among the food debris of early modern humans. At first glance, a broken eggshell doesn't sound like much of a discovery, but the context around it told a different story. These fragments weren't randomly scattered. They showed patterns consistent with deliberate collection and use, alongside other food remains that clearly represented meals. An ostrich egg is enormous, roughly equivalent in volume to 24 chicken eggs, meaning a single find could feed several people at once. For early humans navigating a landscape where a large kill might not come for days, an ostrich nest represented something incredibly rare. A guaranteed high-calorie meal that didn't require running down anything or getting close to teeth and claws. Here's the detail that should make you pause. This wasn't a rare, desperate behavior. Evidence like this appears across multiple sites and time periods in southern Africa, suggesting that egg gathering wasn't an occasional act of opportunism. It was a consistent, reliable strategy, quietly running alongside hunting and gathering for tens of thousands of years before anyone would ever domesticate a single animal. Which raises an obvious question: if eggs were already part of the human diet before agriculture even existed, why does the egg you cracked this morning almost certainly come from a chicken? The answer involves a very different kind of story, one that took thousands of years and, more surprisingly, took scientists decades to get right. For a long time, the domestication of chickens was placed somewhere around 8,000 years ago in East Asia, an assumption based largely on old excavation reports and a handful of ambiguous bone fragments. Then, in 2022, evolutionary geneticist Gregor Larson led a large international team that went back and re-examined the archaeological record with a level of scrutiny it had never received. His team combined radiocarbon dating, contextual analysis of where remains were actually found, and genetic evidence from modern chicken populations, and the results overturned a date that had been repeated in textbooks for years. Larson's research pushed the earliest confirmed domestication of chickens forward by thousands of years, situating it more plausibly around 1500 BCE in what is now Thailand, arising from the wild red jungle fowl. Even more strikingly, his team found that many of the older bones previously assumed to be ancient domestic chickens were likely misidentified, or came from contexts too disturbed to reliably date. In other words, one of the most repeated facts in agricultural history had been wrong, not by a small margin, but by potentially thousands of years, and nobody had gone back to check the assumption until relatively recently. Why would humans domesticate a bird for its eggs at all, when wild eggs like those ostrich shells at Pinnacle Point were already a workable food source? The answer has less to do with taste and more to do with reliability at scale. A wild egg is a lottery. You have to find the nest, beat the predators to it, and hope the timing lines up with the laying season. A domesticated chicken standing in your own settlement solves every part of that problem simultaneously. It lays eggs on a predictable, repeated schedule, close enough to home that no hunting expedition, tracking skill or luck is required at all. Zoo archaeologist Joris Peters, who has spent years studying how chickens physically spread from region to region through the archaeological record, has traced how this reliability made the bird strikingly valuable as they moved outward from Southeast Asia into the Middle East, the Mediterranean, and eventually across the rest of the world, carried along trade routes as a small, portable, endlessly renewable food source that required almost no specialized infrastructure to maintain. This is where two very different timelines in human history quietly collide inside your kitchen. The egg on your plate this morning descends from a domesticated bird whose ancestry traces back a few thousand years to Southeast Asia. But the underlying behavior, the specific human instinct to crack open a shell and eat what's inside, descends from something far older, from ancestors who were already doing exactly that with ostrich eggs in South Africa tens of thousands of years before anyone had ever built a chicken coop. You inherited the appetite long before you inherited the animal. Think about what that means the next time you're standing in a grocery store aisle, staring at a carton of a dozen eggs like it's the most boring purchase you'll make all week. That carton represents two overlapping human stories stacked directly on top of each other. One is ancient and improvised, a 100,000-year-old survival strategy built around finding rare, calorie-dense packages hidden in the wild. The other is comparatively recent and deliberate, a domestication project that took thousands of years, multiple regions, and as it turns out, several decades of scientists getting the actual date wrong before finally landing on something closer to the truth. Neither timeline replaced the other. They simply layered, one behavior quietly persisting underneath a completely different animal, a completely different scale, and a completely different economy, while the core act at the center of it all never changed at all. So the next time you crack an egg into a pan on an ordinary Tuesday morning, you're not performing some small, forgettable routine. You're repeating one of the oldest, most reliably successful food decisions your species ever made, going back so far that the animal it originally came from wasn't even the same species you're eating from today. The shell has changed. The bird has changed. The decision to crack it open never has. The more we learn about the past, the better we understand ourselves. If this video sparked your curiosity, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow Phoenix Primeval for more fascinating stories from history, science, and human evolution. Thanks for watching.